Yeah, let me trim my beard. Yeah. Yeah. What's up, guys? This is the 7th episode of the Boom Podcast. If you've been listening this far, if you're brand new here, let me just say this podcast is for solo professionals and small business owners who struggle with either marketing, sales, fulfillment, operations, admin staff, automation. We got a lot of guests lined up. And today's guest is one of my favorite humans from LinkedIn, Nick. I'll introduce him in a second. But I met Nick a while back, I think, maybe 2 years ago. And one of the very first times I interacted with him was when he was doing his live on LinkedIn when he first came on the scene. And of course, I was being a crybaby. I was saying, I can't join the live, it's not closed caption. And Nick, 90% of the time when you say that to people kind of just, oh, I'm sorry, bro. But Nick went off and did something. I think he found order and found a way to plug in order to the live. From that day forward, I became Nick's biggest fan. So I brought Nick today to talk about podcasting. How to start a podcast, what's the ROI of a podcast, what's the quickest way to get it going, and what are some hard lessons he might have learned using it. So Nick does a lot of things. I'm going to let Nick introduce himself to us. So Nick, who are you and what do you do?
First of all, Doug, I just want to say thank you very much for having me on here. And to iterate what you said about the closed captioning, to me, that's really important. I want to be inclusive of any content that I make. Captions are also for the hard of hearing or the deaf. And me, I'm the father of a child. So I don't watch TV unless it has closed captions anyways, because I couldn't hear anything that would be said while kids are playing. So just that's my 2 cents on that. If you're out here and you're watching this and you're thinking that closed captions are just a nice ad, think about all the people that you're leaving out by not having them on there. So just go ahead and do it. Tools are there. They're readily available. They're easy to use. So I'll just go into my quick elevator pitch. I'm Nick Lozano. I'm a technologist by trade. I've been in technology for about the past 10 years. I'm a podcaster. I started podcasting pretty much for my day job about 5 years ago, and I've been running my own for about three and a half. I can never remember what year it is or what day it is. So it's either 3 or 4 years or 3.5 years. I don't remember. And like Doug said, I even dabbled in a little bit of live streaming when, we were quarantining. I was like, okay, let me find another medium here to kind of, expose myself and LinkedIn. I was one of those lucky people who got early access to it, where you actually had to fill out a job application to get it. And that's, where I wound up, where I am today. I'm a content creator and I run technology and, my daytime job.
Before we go much further, I have to fully admit, for almost like a full year, in my mind, I thought you were a legit janitor. Like you were on LinkedIn as a janitor the whole time, and you were a janitor who had time to podcast. And I couldn't reconcile your tagline. It wasn't until later. What a moron. Me, not you.
No.
And I should have looked a little bit closer. And I think you have a great story. For those of you who don't know, let them know, what is your tagline on LinkedIn?
Sure.
It's right behind you, by the way.
Yeah, it's right behind me for all those people who are watching. If you're not watching the YouTube, go ahead and check out the YouTube. But back to your point real quick before I get to that, is that I actually listed my job as a janitor on LinkedIn initially in the beginning when I started creating content, because, the nature of my day job, I'm a technology leader. I have technology spend. So I was curious if people were consuming my content because I could buy something from them, or they were generally interested in what I was doing. So I literally had my job listed as a janitor. And if you connected with me at that point in time, that's what you saw. And that was my only job on there. But to go back to my headline, the Ronin janitor, that just stems, back from my first job that I ever got paid for doing was a janitor. I've had multiple different careers through my adult life. I'm living proof that you can switch careers at any time, do something else, and wind up where you're at. And the janitor thing goes back to whenever I used to go to networking events when those were a thing, which I'm sure they will be again. Whenever you're watching this, we had a pandemic, a while ago, but I would always tell people the dreaded, what do you do question, right? And I would just tell people I was a janitor, right? And that
It's
instantly,
awkward,
it rules people out, right? Who are just looking to sell you something. Some of the most interesting people that I've ever met are the people who hang out and they're like, wait, can you tell me a little bit more about that? And I would just go into my experience that I had when I was a janitor, right? Like the different things that I would see. And then eventually, I'd reveal, what I really did for my daytime. But at that time we had started talking with each other. It kind of goes back to this mentality that I feel like I can learn anything from anybody at any time. It doesn't really matter who you are or what you do. We're all here. We're human and we can learn from each other as long as you're open to it.
Yeah. Back when conferences were happening, especially for the local Chicago stock, sometimes people would send me out to the booth and, because you had to put the marketing materials together and I didn't work the booth, but I had to kind of coordinate some of the stuff with the chief marketing officer. And it's the most dreadful thing. What do you do? Who you at? And there's this guy that I saw when somebody asked him that question, he goes, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. That's what I'm going to do. So every time I went to a conference, somebody said, hey, Doug, what do you do? I'm like, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And what it does is it filters out people a little bit because on the one hand, you got people so programmed, no offense to anyone, so programmed with they're kind of stunned, like they don't know how to carry on the conversation after that. And the other part was I will find people who crack up laughing. They're like, I know what you mean, man. And so I imagine introducing yourself as a janitor has a similar effect, right?
It surely does. And it's one of those things and you talk about this a lot of time when you post content, right? It's those people who learned that in some sales training somewhere, right? Like you're going to qualify the lead, you need to know who you're talking to right away. Well, how about just building a relationship with somebody? I might not be able to buy whatever you're selling, but I might know somebody. Like if I know you pretty well, right? It's just one of those things. We had a relationship. If I know somebody who needs copywriting or needs to learn how to use LinkedIn, you're probably one of the first people that comes to mind for me. And that's just relationship building, right? It's about building relationships. And I had heard somebody post I read it, that, they didn't like the words clients. And I kind of agree with that, right? It's about building a relationship and having a rapport with somebody, and kind of doing something together.
Yeah, I think calling somebody a client is awkward. I still have an awkward time saying that word after a decade of using it. I honestly don't know the alternative. In fact, some of my best clients are not even clients at all. Even though I give them my invoice at the end of the month, they're my fans at the end of the day, which is weird because I'm like, hey, I know we're fans and all, but here's my invoice. But I actually hang out with them outside of the call. We like to banter. We like to talk. It's really awkward to call them clients because I feel like we're much more than that, especially the good ones, So labels are so misleading, not just when we introduce ourselves, but the way we describe other people. And I think they really limit your ability to network better, right?
Because, I agree with you.
I think you're a master networker, by the way, because you're on Discord a lot. You're on LinkedIn. God knows where else you hang out. But what is your method to networking? Are you just looking for people to have fun with, or are you genuinely curious about other people?
So when I initially got, how I got onto LinkedIn, like most people, right? I needed to figure out how to promote my podcast, right? And I did all the terrible stuff that everybody does, right? I post a link, shared a link because you're just seeing what other people are doing. And I didn't really start getting into networking till I just kind of dropped that. And I had done this 90-day video challenge. So it was a video every day for 90 days. And at that point in time, I couldn't think about promoting anything because I had to make a video every single day. And that really got me out of the mindset of like, hey, like I should do this, for X reasons. It's like, hey, just give some value to some people. Try to think of something of value. And then eventually when you have something to sell or you've got something to give, people are more willing to listen, right? As opposed to the sales message, shove it down your throat. And it's not to say that it's bad to promote your things or what you do, but it shouldn't be the thing that you do every single time that you do something, right? And I feel that way with podcasting too. And I'm sure we'll touch on that in a little bit too.
Yeah. And we'll get to that in a second. But going back to the shoving things down people's throat, it's hard to find the right time to talk about this stuff. I think LinkedIn had, on the one hand, did it right by telling, culturally speaking, stop doing that. Start talking to me, start giving me something of value, then I'll be interested in you, which I agree wholeheartedly. But there comes a time where you actually need to make an offer because there are a lot of people who are lurkers, who really are lurkers. I find people are lurking because they're insecure about something. And sometimes to get a lurker to come over, you do have to talk about your stuff. But like you said, doing it all the time, every single time, yeah, that's a great way to have nobody in the comments, right? So tell me a little bit about your podcast. So you started a couple. Let's start from the beginning. What was the name of your very first podcast?
So the very first one I did for my day job, and it's still running. I don't produce it anymore. It's called the Council Cast, and our magazine kind of does it. But it was like one of those things where our CEO was like, hey, these podcast things are popular. Can we figure out how to do them? And for me, I'm just inherently a curious person. I'm the type of person who sees a problem. I'm like, I can figure out how to do this, right? I've got YouTube University. I can figure out how to do anything I want to do, right? This is the modern day. And that's literally how that all started. I had some audio experience anyways. I played different instruments when I was in high school, so I was kind of used to recording instruments. This was recording voice, a little bit different. But, the underlying methodologies and tools and the way you think about producing it are kind of the same. You're thinking about producing an experience for somebody to consume that is audio only. But now, with podcasting, there's a lot more considerations. It's just not music or lyrics. You're thinking of dialogue and how you tell a story. That's literally how I started with that one. The one I have now is it's called lead.exe. Sometimes people call it LED. That's my mistake, but it stands for leadership.execute. And we look at leadership topics and ideas from a technology leader perspective. So I've really taken that leadership idea and really narrowed down my audience as far as I could possibly go. It's not that we always talk about technology or leadership. Heck, one time I had a photographer on there who has nothing to do about leadership or photography, but it just goes back to my whole mentality. I can learn anything from anybody at any time.
Let's go back to when your boss told you about starting a podcast, right? In your mind, then, not now, then, what did you think a podcast meant?
So I was already into podcasts, like even years before that. So I think what had started getting me in the podcast route is, I don't know if anyone remembers Adam Carolla, but,
Yes.
The guy from the Man Show, he had a podcast, and maybe it's still going. I don't know, but, I was following him on Twitter or something, I think. And he's like, oh, I've got this podcast thing. And it was similar to like Joe Rogan's when he started, where he was just him talking with his friends. And from there, I kind of started with that one. And then I'm like, oh, wait, there's more here. There's like different creators. And this is kind of my first realm into like content creators outside of Twitter. I had always been a big Twitter user in the past. So like the short text. And this is my first thing of finding like people who had very niche down products. I'm like, oh, if I have an interest in, XYZ, I can find somebody who has a podcast about it. And I really enjoyed that long form audio type, radio type experience. It was like a bit of nostalgia for me, right? It's like you're waiting for this episode to come and it's audio only, and you don't know what they're going to talk about. So it just really brought me back to days of kind of being a kid and listening to the radio and waiting for the next show to come.
Yeah, I came late to podcasts, probably between you and I, for obvious reasons, because
Yep.
I never listened to the radio. For those of you just listening, I can't hear it for jack shit. I don't know if that's going to get bleeped out anywhere, but I can't hear anything. So radio for me, so I have friends who grew up listening to NPR. It took me the entire friendship to figure out what NPR stands for and what they even talk about. I mean, I just don't fundamentally listen to radio. I don't say that it's a guilt trip. My angle to podcast didn't come out until people started putting their podcasts on YouTube. That's when I was like, okay, so if this is a 90-minute video, what the hell are they going to talk about for 90 minutes? And you click it, and you're like, okay, this is a very free form, well, not free anymore, but almost a loose form conversation that's being recorded. And some people keep it very structured, like Adam Carolla. Some people just have their friends on and have a laugh. And it's become much more than that. But it's interesting for you, probably for 99% of the world. It is a harken back to the radio days made for the digital age, which can be found on your phone, most likely. And so, yeah, for me, I'm late to the podcast game because of that. But for you, when you listen to somebody on podcast before you started your own, do you feel closer to the content creator, or what is the allure of listening to a podcast for you?
So for me, the allure, I think, is when we think about what content is out there today, and you think about TV, you think about YouTube, you think about all this stuff, that's all really short form content. Especially when you think of like TikToks and news cycles, it's really hard to hear somebody's full elaborate idea in that short of a time span, right? I mean, you might be able to get, your point across in like 90 seconds, but you can't elaborate on your whole thoughts and ideas. And that's where that podcast, the long form content that I really enjoy, right? So we're here talking on a long form content. You could read one of my LinkedIn posts, but it might take you 5 months to see my whole story that I had about how that janitor came from, and how, like, why do I have a samurai behind me with a plunger and a mop, right? But it's one of that long form content. It's kind of like we're together at a bar, we're having a conversation, and so you get to sit right there, right? You might not be an active participant, but you get to feel like you're sitting right there as the conversation's happening, that deep dialogue. And that's what I really think is what's great about it. And what I even love too is more podcasters are starting to put their podcasts on YouTube and think about making them video first. And that's opening it up to a whole nother world. Like you said, the deaf community right there. It's like, until someone starts transcribing their podcast, you would have no idea what it is or why anyone would sit down and listen to something, right?
I think people like, you might laugh at me for that. I think people like Logan Paul, right? Which is, speaking to your point, they used the podcast visually first, and then because it's almost in his garage where he has host and bringing guests on. It's a very visual podcast, and that's something I would love to build toward. But back to the point before you made, I've watched, believe it or not, I might get some hate for that, Jordan Peterson podcast. Now, here, you might disagree with Jordan Peterson, but I love the Jordan Peterson debates, and not these quick snapshots that you're talking about with TikTok. It's literally 2 hours long about a singular subject with opposing point of view. And man, you can go down some deep rabbit hole intellectually if you listen to people like Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, things of that nature, intelligence squared. You're definitely going to lose your intelligence if you watch somebody like Logan Paul. But he serves a purpose. He's very entertaining. He's also very young. But who today is your favorite podcaster?
Oh man, if you were to ask me one today, it'd probably be Jocko Willink, who is, he has the podcast just called Jocko Podcast. And like you see, I'm actually wearing a sweatshirt from his company, but it's one of those things. He had a big impact on me just as, you know, an individual. I started listening to his podcast when he had the first one. I had heard him on I think Tim Ferriss or something like that. And I just really dug what he was talking about, right? Yeah, and I mean he like totally exploded. Like probably I used to be able to chat with him on Twitter, and now it's impossible.
You used to be able to talk to him on Twitter.
Yeah, and he would reply to things. But then, you know, he just hit the exponential.
4 o'clock in the morning.
I didn't know. I've gotten up and worked out at 4 o'clock in the morning before, but that's because a child has woken me up. So it's like, I'm not going to wake up at 4 intentionally to work out. But you know, he had a big impact in me, and same thing, Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris. I really like how they bring out the intellectual debates and things, and they don't really shut ideas down. I know both of them kind of get twisted in the media some. With them, it's worth going to the source to see their full fleshed out ideas. And it goes back to the same thing, right? I can make a 30-second soundbite of anything and make it sound however I want it to sound, right? It's another thing to sit down and listen to the whole long form content to see how the ideas play out and are developed.
Why do you like Jocko? What about him? For me, you know, he was the first person that made me say, it's your fault, Doug. It's all your fault. You know, because today I still do to some degree, I used to blame. And he's like, no, it's your fault. No, but, you know, believe it or not, I used my deafness as an excuse way back when. It was Jocko that was like, you know, screw the deafness, it's your fault. And obviously we all know deafness isn't my fault, but owning it is mine. And any excuse that I make for it is me shielding that over, taking control over the situation. So I'm very curious. I never would have pictured you for a Jocko. I don't even know what a Jocko fan is supposed to look like. I think, you know, in my mind, the big MMA guy, but you do dabble in MMA, but I just had a totally different image. What about Jocko that you like?
I think it was just like you said, like he seemed really like that's who he was when he spoke, right? Like he seemed like to me like whoever you heard on the show or saw in YouTube clips is that is the exact person he is all the time. And it's that accountability, right? He just seems like the type of guy that like if I worked for him, I would crawl through razor blades for him. You know, and it sounds weird. It's just one of those things where you feel
in my life, believe it or not.
Yeah, it's like
that kind of male leadership that won't let me out. They keep your eyes right on you, and you feel compelled to perform for them.
Exactly, and it's you know, it's one of those things when I just listened to him speak, I just felt like everything he was saying was genuine, right? When he's like, you know, when you say about the thing, it's your fault, right? And those are things when I listen to him, I'm like, that's just great. You know, like, why am I worrying about making an excuse for what something is, right? Instead of just accepting that fact and moving forward. And it's a tough thing for all of us to handle. And I feel like he brings that tough love that everyone needs. And, you know, I understand he's not everybody's cup of tea, right? There's some people, like, especially on the internet, he can be polarizing to some people as well, too. But I mean, he has had a big impact on me as well. Outside of the MMA stuff, you know, I started doing Muay Thai about 10 years ago. And I think that's how I kind of first started latching on to him when I heard him on Tim Ferriss. I'm like, oh, he's kind of cool. And he does, you know, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And, you know, I've always trained in a gym that did that. So I kind of get some of the mentality of like being at a martial arts gym, hanging out with some of the people and it being like a close knit community.
I'm actually terrified to go into an MMA gym. I don't know why. given that I love playing rugby for almost 8, 9 years, I played American football in high school. I've done powerlifting, but I kind of feel, again, it goes back to being that, and I kind of feel like if I were to go in there, number one, I wouldn't be able to understand what to do while somebody's crotch is in my face. That's one. It's just very intimidating in a lot of ways. Which is strange. Again, if you ever stepped on a rugby field or practice field, nothing more intimidating than a group of Samoans warming up before the game, and you're like this white guy, like, okay, I'm going to get a concussion today, for sure. And it's exactly what happened. You give a Samoan a rugby ball, you're going to get a concussion trying to tackle him. For some reason, I can't translate overcoming that type of fear to getting my butt into an MMA gym. I don't know why. I guess it seems like a closed off community for crazy people. Am I wrong on that?
I think, MMA is one thing, and maybe a lot of that has changed since I've done MMA. I do mostly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now, but I know for that.
MMA is an umbrella term, but like,
So
BJJ or Muay Thai or whatever, or wrestling.
So what I will say,
American wrestling practice, something like that.
So what I will say is, in my experience in the 6+ years I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is that it's a very welcoming community. It is the only sport that I've done where we literally don't care who you are, where you came from, what you do. If you want to train, we want to train with you. I've trained with, straight men, gay men, women, people of all genders and races. We don't care, right? It's about, everybody's there for the experience to learn how to do something and make themselves better. And it's one of those sports where you can't do it by yourself, right? You need a training partner there with you. And it's about different level of respect, right? And a lot of it's humbling. You first come into that sport, and especially if you're a larger individual, if you're a bigger guy, 190 pounds, 80 kilos, something like that. And you're used to having your way on a sports field. And then all of a sudden you come in and some woman who's a purple belt, who's like 110 pounds, is just handing it to you. And I speak from experience. That happened to me. I'm not 190 pounds.
To my son. That actually happened to my son. My son, I put him in BJJ, and it was a trial group, right? And they put him, so Jake at that time was 11 and probably over 100 pounds. And they put him with the group. And I saw a little girl walk up to him. And why are you putting him with the little girl? He's going to hurt her. She just slammed him on the ground in one foul swoop. And I can't hear that well, but I could feel boom. And she just knocked it back into the ground. You could just see Jake's face. He was so embarrassed. But I mean, oh, damn. So, yeah, a grown man getting handled by a purple belt, it's got to be the most humbling experience you can ever have, right?
It is. And it's what's great about it is that it's an element of trust, right? You come in there and you trust that when somebody chokes you and you can't breathe anymore, or that you're going to tap and they're going to stop what they're doing, right? They're not going to break your leg. And one of the neat things about the sports is that, like other sports will get knuckleheads in them, right? Like rugby, you're probably used to like a knucklehead coming in there and he's always trying to hurt somebody. Well, and
you're absolutely right about rugby. There's no shutout foul.
Yep.
They go there to fight. And I always assumed MMA was like that. Like, I'm going to get soaked. There's no out. I'm not going to have a team that, stomp on them to get them out. So that's sort of my fear with transitioning into that. From what you're telling me, that's not the case. No,
that's not the case. And those knuckleheads, they don't last, right? Because one, it's humbling, right? When somebody's smaller than you, or older than you. I've had a guy who's like 65 hand me my lunch. It's like, so it's one of those things. It's just a humbling experience. And there's something about doing hard things and doing them together and kind of being there with everybody that makes it really well. And I think somebody that I trained with before in the past did it really well. He's like, when I was in the military, I thought I would never get the sense of community ever again when I left. And he's like, for some reason, when I come to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there's something about it. We're just all here doing hard things, doing them together that builds this tight knit bond. And half the time we don't even know what everybody does because it's not even what we think about, right? We're just there to train, make friends and have a good time and hang out with that community. So I would tell you to use just, go to your first one, right? And be okay with just like maybe not being good, but you'll find that the community is really helpful. Everybody wants everybody to be good. Everybody wants to help people learn. It's a really supportive community.
Interesting. I mean, we have 30 minutes left. We could talk about this for bloody hours. So let's start back to why about you want. Now, let's reverse engineer. Help me reverse engineer a good podcast, okay? Now, good can be defined in many different ways. I mean, that's, Joe Rogan good. We're not here to talk about Joe Rogan. I'm talking about good for somebody who owns a business or wants to build brand and generate a wider net with their content beyond a social media platform. So maybe somebody B2B who wants to start a podcast that generates either more leads, more brand awareness, maybe more credibility within what they're doing on another platform. So for me, that's a successful podcast for what we're here to talk about. So you're the expert. How we're going to reverse engineer what you need to do in order to have a quote, air quote, successful business podcast that generates leads for you and or build your brand. Are you game for this?
I'm game for this. I'm game for this.
Lead the way. Let's go back. Let's start successful. How would somebody reverse engineer that process?
Okay. So the first thing I always tell people, right, is they're like, I'm going to start a podcast, and they look at Jocko, they look at Jordan Peterson, they look at Joe Rogan, and they try to imitate that, right? So first off, just be yourself, because you're not going to be able to fake being somebody else through thousands of hours of content, because podcasting is a super long game. So the first thing you said, right, is define.
How super long? Let's be honest here. Let's get it on the table. How super long?
Oh, well, I mean, it could take you well over a year before you have an audience. The hardest thing with getting a podcast is, right, you can make the content, you can edit it, you can make it super slick. The hardest time you're going to have is promoting it and getting people to listen to it, right? Because it's just like anything else. It's similar to probably trying to do YouTube videos, right? You have to get in front of people somehow. And generally the way the algorithms work, it doesn't favor the small creator, right? So you kind of have to be scrappy, right? With how you do stuff. So I would say when you're first starting, think about how far you can pare down what you want to talk about, right? And it's not that you have to stay in that lane all the time. Like right now, my podcast is about technology from a technology leadership level. But like I told you earlier, one time I talked to a photographer, and that has nothing to do with technology or leadership. I just thought he was really interesting and had some great ideas. So I would say think about the format you would like to do mainly on topic. Do you want to entertain? Do you want to be informational? Do you want to do interviews? Do you want to do, there's things called micro podcasting where you could do 7 to 8 minute podcast. Think about what you want that experience to be, right? And what you want to talk about and, what you can sustain. So I always tell people when you're first starting and you want to do a podcast, write down 20 show ideas. If you can't get to 20, then maybe you need to reframe your topic or your show idea, because like I said, podcasting is a long game and it's going to take you a while to get there. It doesn't mean that your show can't evolve as it goes on, but you at least want to have 20 episodes where you kind of know what you want to talk about, who you want to talk to. And that's where I always tell people to start. And if you want to get into that comparison game of Joe Rogan, 99% available and visible, those top tier podcasts that get millions of downloads, don't listen to their current episodes. Go back and listen to their very first ones, because I guarantee you they are terrible. My first podcast is absolutely horrible, and I'm okay to admit that. The first time you do anything, you're going to be terrible at it. So embrace the suck, as the Marines say, right? Embrace the suck and be okay that it's going to be terrible. You're going to do the best you can.
I'm 1 full month into it. I had 5 booming subscribers. I have less than 6 views on some of these things. And I've, in my mind, totally blocked that. I don't care. Right now, I don't care. I'm not looking for instant results, only because I've seen other people do it. And like you said, it's a long game. So just for reference, I've brought on people I enjoy talking to on LinkedIn to help me selfishly sustain that long enough. Otherwise, I don't really want to talk to myself for the next 20 shows. I'd rather bring on people, obviously, who bring value, but also bring me entertainment to keep me not bored. That sounds very selfish of me, but I totally agree. As a rookie, I can see how long this is going to take me. And I know a lot of business owners would freak the app out if they found after a month of doing that, you get 6 views total on all of your episodes. That's scary, but I'm laughing because it's so true. So that's a great, write down 20 shows right now. If you can't get to 20, you're not going to last, right?
Yeah, that's what I would say, right? And it's just like anything else, right? You have to have some kind of vision of what you're trying to accomplish. And like you said, you've got 6 views. I'm just starting to get my YouTube channel going. I don't have that many subscribers either, and I don't care about that, right? I mean, I do care, but I'm not going to cry about it, right? Whatever. Everybody starts somewhere, right? I can't compare my beginning to someone else's end or middle. So it is what it is. I have as many subscribers on that as I have, and that's fine, right? As long as I have the right 20, 30 subscribers, that's all I care about, right? Could you imagine going to a speaking event where you're like, hey, I'm going to talk for an hour, and you get 20 people to come to that? Wouldn't you be so excited if you had 20 people in front of you to just talk about something that you love talking about? So think about it that way.
Number one, in real life, what freaked me out. And number 2, 20 people in a room listening to your conversation with somebody. It's pretty damn cool if you think about it.
Yeah, and that's like, to me, when you listen, when you think about podcasting, a lot of times people are commuting when they're listening to it. So they're driving, for us hearing folks, like we're driving or we're mowing the lawn or we're doing something like that. So a lot of times they're kind of fully invested in whatever you're saying or what you're doing. So to me, it's like, don't worry too much about the views when you're starting or the downloads or the subscribers. Just worry about making something that you want to listen to, because the odds are in the very beginning, you're going to be the one who's listening to it mostly, right? You're going to be editing in it. You're going to be writing the transcripts. Yeah, you and your mom, right? Or your friend or something, or your guest, right? But really make a show that you want to listen to, right? In the very beginning, because it's going to be you listening to it, and make it a product that you would enjoy if you just ran across it. And by just doing that in general will lead you the right way. And just like anything else, right? Your journey is going to change. Your ideas for the show are going to change, and that's okay, right? As long as you're still creating something that you enjoy.
2 questions. One, you mentioned a lot of people listen to a podcast and commute, mowing the lawn, So it seems to me it's a little bit fundamentally different than social media, where we measure metrics based on how a post performs right now. So if I posted an hour ago and it gets 6 views, that's a bad post for me. Whereas podcast, it seems like the attribution or the metric to listen to one, it's delayed. So people end up, I'm guessing, saving it for a later day, right?
Yep. And, that's traditionally how it's been. But some of the players that are getting to it, like Spotify, if people listen through Spotify knows when you hit play. They're like YouTube. They know when people drop off, and they'll give you that information.
YouTube does too if you're YouTube.
And you know what? YouTube has surprised me that they haven't fully latched on to podcasters because they have everything there.
They haven't.
You know, it's like they could literally crush Spotify if they wanted to.
I haven't done my RSS feed thing. I'm purely on YouTube. I probably made a big mistake because I deleted the MP3. But my point is, I think people need to adjust their expectation when they start measuring the effectiveness of a podcast, because it's not, people don't listen to an hour podcast right on the fly. They listen to it later. So am I wrong on that? So how would you measure from the time you post something to, oh, this is a great podcast, it's performing really well?
So the traditional podcast metric is downloads. So here's the whole thing with podcasting is that the analytics are like the internet from the 90s. It's just very hard to tell how many people you actually have who are subscribers. And that's why some podcasters are really like driving people to listen on Spotify because they can get that information. And Spotify has bought a lot of podcasting tools. They own a lot of the stuff that people would use, like Anchor, Megaphone. So a lot of podcasts are driving people to that, but the general analytic that most people use is downloads, right? If you're starting a podcast and you're like, hey, I want advertisers, the advertisers are going to know average how many downloads do you get per episode. And that's kind of the benchmark that they use. Starting to change a little bit as Spotify is getting in the game, and some podcasters are publishing on YouTube mostly, and they can kind of figure out how they're doing. But for the most part, like you said, it's kind of a shot in the dark. You're like, okay, this episode has the most downloads, and it could have the most downloads because of a title. And it's hard to know. Like I said, it's equivalent to the internet in the 90s, right? Where all you have is the bounce rate. And you're like, okay, the bounce rate's not high on this page, so this must be a good post. So some of that is be okay with that ambiguity of not having super pinned down metrics. You're probably going to have to survey your listeners, kind of get a feel on social media with what's working and what's not.
Oh, and the second question I wanted to ask you, people probably, if they're listening to this conversation, then what the F is the point of doing a podcast if A, you can't measure it accurately as you want it to, and B, it's going to take a ton of time for you to even grow your audience. Why bother? Why bother do it? I need money. I need it now. I need leads tomorrow. By the way, if that's what you're thinking, podcast is the wrong way to go. But I want to hear from you. Why bother with the podcast as a business?
So the one thing I would say is that, metrics aren't the end all be all. And so I did a show in December, right? And me and my co-host, we kind of recorded on the fly, and we just talked about how effective leadership affects employee performance. And we went through this whole thing about, like a bad leader can, cause employee morale to go down, and, the leader should be having conversations with employees and so on and so on. And we got feedback about a month later from somebody who listened to the show and said, hey, I really want to thank you for this show. That caused me to look at my situation, realize that I was in a toxic work environment and I needed to change. I got a new job and I just wanted to say thank you. And to me, that is worth more than any number of downloads, any number of click-through listens. That's a real life somebody who took time out of their day to give me their time. They gave me their time, which is something that's, to me, is more valuable than anything else, to tell me that I had an impact on them. And I would say, to answer your question, is that, some of it could be building your reputation, right? You're proving your expertise. This is long form content. So if you have stuff that doesn't fit and, a 250 character Twitter post, podcasting is perfect for you. If you enjoy speaking more than writing a long blog post, podcasting is perfect for you. Like I said, it's a long game. It helps you build authority, brand, and a reputation. One way you can level yourself up is just by what I'm doing right here. So I'm being a guest on your podcast, right? So if you're a podcaster, go out and be a guest on every podcast that you can be. That's one way to level yourself up and have more people exposed to who you are. especially if you sell a product or you have a service. A lot of times at the end of a podcast, they're like, hey, by the way, why don't you tell our listeners how they can get a hold of you or what you do? That's one way to really level yourself up. So think of podcasting as a way to build your brand, your reputation, and your expertise. And don't think of it quite as much as being the next Joe Rogan or the Jocko or the Jordan Peterson. Could it happen? Yes. But, the chances are probably pretty small. So the chances are about as good as me of being, Hugh Jackman and getting a role in the X-Men movie, right? it's pretty slim. So be okay with, being the brand expert and, being the expert on a topic.
You're making me think here because you said that a podcast is a great way to demonstrate your expertise or subject matter expertise. I've actually had clients say, this is not worth it because every time I bring on a guest, all they want to do is talk. I don't get a chance to talk. And I'm like, well, that's probably because you suck at hosting people. You don't know how to have a conversation with people. I just want to hear your feedback on that, but I will tell you what I told them, which was, you go on a podcast to have a conversation, not to brag about your expertise. Well, if you strategically know how to have a conversation, your expertise will come through at a certain point of the podcast. But yet, your guest is probably going to speak more than you will. And that person was like, oh, well, if that's the case, screw it. I'm like, all right, man. So what would be your response if somebody said that to you?
So you could have a different format of a show, right?
Okay, let's talk about
because
that.
So if you're going to go with an interview style show, right?
Which is what I'm doing, by the way. I prefer interview.
So when you have a guest on, instantly the show is not about you as a host anymore, right? It's about the person you bring on, the conversation that we're going to have. The guest is going to kind of lead that topic. If you're worried about not having the time to prove your expertise, maybe a solo show is better for you. And then reaching out to other podcasters to see if you can be guest on their shows. There's different ones you can do. It doesn't have to straight be the interview format, right? You could do like the one thing that a friend of mine on LinkedIn, Troy Ritchie, he wrote a book off his micro podcast, and he literally every day for 2 years did like he did a 6-minute podcast, or give or take. And all he would do is say his thoughts every day. And that's a perfect way to do expertise. The great thing is there are no rules here, right? This is art. Make the art that you enjoy and that makes an impact in an area that you want to do. There's no rules here, right? You can do whatever you want.
What made me, as you were talking, I realized if you really wanted to demonstrate your expertise using the podcast format, you might want to check out, as much as I hate saying his name, I think he's a fine gentleman. I just hate driving more traffic to him. His name is Chris Walker on LinkedIn. Chris Walker, I forget what his State of Demand Generation. Please don't go check it out, okay? Stay here. But he is able to demonstrate his expertise because he teams up with a sort of sales guy in a different company, and together they talk together about a topic brought up by the audience, and both of them are able to talk for hours about their expertise, and they cut it up to micro clips and they put it on LinkedIn, and everybody goes absolutely gaga over it. So maybe you need to find a partner who's complementary to your skill set to have a longer conversation about what you know. Similar to Chris, I know everything about marketing, Walker, so would you say that would be accurate?
Hey, I say that's 100% accurate, right? I have a co-host. I have two, but I have it for a reason, right? One is I enjoyed them, and these were conversations that we would just have in general. I'm like, hey, maybe we should record this and make it a podcast instead of just talking over beers. But the other thing is it allows you to bounce ideas off of other people. If you both like a certain topic, having a co-host, somebody else who you can bounce ideas off of, have a conversation with, that works really well. And I found too, as well, when I bring guests on, having the co-host allows me, like, if a topic gets really deep and I might not have a question, because it's like, I just talked to somebody who founded, a cryptocurrency company and is a cryptographer, and like literally somebody who's on the forefront of like Web3. And it was really helpful to have a co-host on there who kind of is a little bit more technical, understands the areas of expertise, was there for Web 1, to bounce ideas off, right? And that way I can focus on formulating my question or thinking about what's the next thing I want to ask. So it's a great way to have a show, right? And then doing the micro content, right? If you have a podcast and you're not making micro content, you're losing out.
For me personally, I don't think I would do well, trying to demonstrate my expertise every single damn show. I really enjoy having conversations with people, and I treat that as much as a learning opportunity for me as it is for the guests. I really want to learn as I grow. So let me dive into another question. So you've got your 20 shows mapped out, planned out. What is the next step for somebody who can map out 20 shows in advance? What should they do next?
So I would say, thinking about how you're going to record your podcast, right? You're probably going to get on Google, right? And you're a marketer, right? You're going to look for what's the best podcast gear. And then all of a sudden you're going to be inundated with a sponsored blog post that's trying to sell you the most expensive thing. Yeah. So I would say, when you're ready to record, use the things you have, right? Especially when it's a new venture, just like anything else, you don't know if you're going to stick with it, right? So most people got an iPhone, right? Or like an Android phone. You got a pair of earbuds that has the microphone on it. Here, you've got one of these things laying around, right? You got one of those somewhere, right? Use those. Use your computer. Use Anchor.fm. Try to use what you have to create your show before you go out spending a lot of resources on it. And, like I said, stay away from those top 20 best product things. Just use what you have and try to, create the best possible show you can. And it's like, there's like this Maya Angelou quote. I think it's like, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. I feel like you just got to take that approach with it.
So you get the gear. What are the 3 podcast platform a rookie should be on when they're first pushing their content down the distribution channel?
Sure. So the first platform you want to be on if you're podcasting is Apple Podcast, right? For the pure audio only podcast, everything lives on that, right? Like, that's like, if you get pure audio only downloads, most of them are going to come from Apple Podcasts. It's just the way the market is sliced up. Then from there, you're going to want to go to, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify. And then if you think about doing a video one,
you need something first in order to be on all of that, right? Well, I goofed up. What is it?
So what you need is so this is the confusing thing, right? You need something that can serve your RSS feed, which is basically, you need a service that you can upload your audio only file to, because basically Apple Podcasts is something that just reads your link. And then when somebody requests the show, the Apple Podcast player just goes to your link and pulls it down. So you have to have a host, right? So that would be like an Anchor.fm, Simplecast, Transistor.fm, Megaphone. There's a bunch of them. Libsyn. They're different prices, different features. I would say just pick one that you can afford in the beginning, whether it's Anchor that's free or Buzzsprout or something that you can afford, and start there, because you can always move your show pretty easily after that.
Okay. So now we're on Google Play, we're on Apple, we're on Spotify, what have you. Now, how do we get traffic? So
how do you get traffic? You got to make micro content, right? I mean, if you have a hot topic, right? Like Rich Cardona, I don't know if you've seen him on LinkedIn, but he had started an
He's
NFT
awesome.
for
He's awesome. His stuff is
yeah, he
really
did
good.
an
He's
NFT for
transitioned
newbies.
to NFT now.
Yeah, and so he had just happened to pick a hot topic and boom, gets downloads right in Apple Podcasts. But don't count on that, right? Think that you're probably going to have to make micro content, whether it's text, blog post, or clips from your show, and you're going to have to post them to social to get people to listen to your podcast. That's what I'd say. That's the hardest part about being a podcaster is actually promoting your content to get people to listen to it.
What was the most successful way you grew your podcast audience?
So for me, it was when we transitioned to video. And because it is very difficult to get people to watch those. I know you've seen them on social media, those little clips of the show, right? And it's a square and it's got the little waveform going like this with the words like this. That doesn't stop anybody from scrolling. And I did it for a while. I didn't do better till I did video, and I took video, the portrait video of what my guest was saying or I was saying, and put that on social media. There's just something about video. I would say that if you're starting a podcast, think about how you would transition to video from the beginning, because there are episodes that I really wish I had video of, but I don't. So I would say,
I'm the opposite of you. There are episodes I wish I had audio for. I don't. I'm probably going to have to somehow record the screen as the video plays and get the audio file back. I'm sure it's simpler than that, right?
So your problem, right? Look at a tool called Audacity. Okay. Put your video file in there, and you can convert it to an MP3.
I'm coming for Spotify, baby. Anyway, so there's another follow-up question to that. So you got your micro clips. You've got you on the right platform. Do you need a landing page for the show?
Yeah, I would say you need something, right? Just in general, a lot of these podcasting hosts, the ones you pay for, like transistor.fm, what I have can make a website for you. If you have your own domain name, it'll list the shows and it can put a little player in there so you can listen to it. But I would say at the very minimum, that's what you want to do. The better thing to do is probably to create your own website with your own landing page, with your own email sign up, so that you can have access to the people, right? You can build a relationship directly without not knowing who they are, right? Because right now, if you have a podcast and it's on Apple Podcast, the relationship in general kind of lays with Apple and the Apple Podcast player, right? Because you don't have direct access to that person. You can't send them an email, say, hey, check out this cool thing that I've got, or, I'm doing something special for my listeners. You can't do that, right? So I would say, do that hub and spoke method that all you marketers talk about. I'm listening to you guys. Drive them from places where you don't own assets to something that you do own.
Okay. Well, I'm a little bit more of a technical question. For me personally, is there something wrong with hosting a podcast on Zoom and recording it, or are there better options?
So you get varying opinions on this, right? To me, Zoom, if this is what you have, use it. I've used it before. People who are diehard podcast people will tell you, oh, the audio quality is terrible. And, like the video quality is terrible. But to me, if you have a guest show, right, the most important thing is that it's easy for guests to join, right? And since the pandemic, lots of people know how to get Zoom, right?
Joe Rogan, who can have celebrities fly in to be on our show. You gotta, they might be from China for all you know, and they need a way to get on the show, right?
Yep. So I would say, Zoom works perfectly fine, right? People will tell you, don't use Zoom. Use it. It's fine. Nobody cares, right? As long as the audio is understandable and it doesn't sound like a telephone, you're okay, right? And then when you want to start leveling up your game, then there's other options. There's like Riverside.fm, there's Squadcast. And what those things do is they record the video separately and the audio separate of each person. But then, as you're going, those things are a bit more expensive. If you have a budget in the beginning and maybe you're a business individual and you're putting, marketing dollars towards it, it might be beneficial to start there. But if you're an individual and you're kind of hustling, just use Zoom, right? The free Zoom, you can have a one-to-one meeting for free, right? And record your computer. And I don't think there's a time limit till you throw a third person in there. So just start there. Just start there.
Yeah. Question real quick. So I take my video. I'm assuming on Spotify, you need to be able to pick your niche properly. Sort of like selling your book on Amazon. You want to make sure that your book doesn't end up in the general public feed and more micro niche down. So you can say, hey, I'm the best seller in XYZ. How important is that to find the right label for your show for something like Spotify?
I think any platform, it's super important because there's just a vast majority of content available to user, right? And I think you've even posted about this before, right? If you try to market to everybody, you will wind up marketing to nobody. So I feel like it's just one of those things, just whatever you enjoy talking about, like maybe we'll go with the janitor theme here since he's behind me, right? Maybe you're a janitorial services company and you just want to talk about the best products that you use and maybe the best tips for cleaning floors or something, right? Maybe you're a floor cleaning company and you just want to chat about, your tips about, give it the best shine,
tried to start a podcast and he sold cleaning products to janitor company. And I told him, I think that's going to be a bad idea. He left me because of that. And we're with a guy named Stephen Pope and showing up, going back to what you said, probably 20 minutes ago. Do you have 20 shows planned out about this topic? Because you're going to run out of things to talk about if all you're going to talk about is Clorox for the next 20 shows. I mean, you've got to think, well, get your niche good so you can market to somebody, but your topic has to be everlasting. It has to last. It has to be
it does.
enough depth to enough rabbit holes to go down to sustain a 3, 4, 5 year long podcast, right?
Yeah, and I would say, it's similar to think about how TV shows are done, right? Think about like the TV show Friends. I don't know if you ever watched that, but it has an overarching theme where the theme is it's a show about these friends as they go through life, but each episode isn't necessarily tied to
life has so many scenarios
each other
that you could play off of. There's a lot of variables.
Yep. So it's just like that. Think of it like a TV show. You have a whole overarching theme, but then you have different areas and topics that you can dissect into. It doesn't have to be, like I said, mine's about technology and leadership, but I've had people on who have nothing to do with that. But I can always tie in the leadership, the life lessons, right? Because everybody has those. So I would say, look at it from an overarching perspective, niche it down, find your individual topics, but then thread that needle through to connect it to your theme.
Do you help people set up their first podcast, or you're doing that solely for your own?
So right now, so I'm going to give you the inside scoop here. Right now, I do not do that. No, but I'm actually in the works of doing that. And I'm probably going to start a course too about getting started. And I'm probably going to do that for free. The course, just because I get so tired of seeing stuff on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, where someone's trying to sell a how to podcast course and it's $150 when you can look it up on YouTube. It's like,
you can literally look it up on YouTube, but it would be nice to have somebody collate, put everything together and have me file it so I'm not going down 20 different rabbit holes about a singular thing with your podcast. In fact, you could probably start a whole podcast just listening to the last 30 minutes of this conversation. So anyway, when do you think this course will be ready? Not to put pressure on you or anything.
Yeah, no. Phew, got pressure on me. I'm hoping probably by the end of the summer, if I can get everything recorded and edited out. I'm definitely getting it out.
See you opening up another revenue stream of, I don't want to say coaching people, but coaching / advising podcasters who need advice along the way. I think that's a great revenue stream.
Sure, and that's actually what I'm
and personable and relatable. So I don't know if you thought about that. You should definitely do that.
So I'm actually going to do that as well too. The course, which won't go in super detail, I'm just going to show you how to do a podcast for no money, 100% no money. I did a PDF about this a couple years ago, but I'm going to go through and record it and show you how to do it for free. But then I'm also probably going to do coaching for somebody else, you know, who's like, hey, Nick, I don't want to watch this course. Let me just pay you some money and just tell me what I need to do. I like to serve both those segments, right? Because it just goes back to my mentality of the janitor, right? I still want to help that person who might not have the spend, right? And who just needs the 10 things to figure out how to do it. Because to me, in the end, you know, if I can help one person be better than they are today, you know, that's what I'm all about. And eventually, you know, I feel like that's karma, right? Stuff like that comes back around when that person is in a better position. They might say, hey, you know, you think I'll start a podcast? Just, you know, get this guy's stuff. He knows what he's talking about.
No, I'm not even kidding, dude. I was hoping you said, yeah, I coach people because I would hire you. I would totally hire you. Yeah, because I need a lot of help. But if you're watching that, you're watching my first quarter. You want to stick around for the fourth quarter. Well, I'm going to be about Kobe Bryant with my podcast. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. We're at the top of the hour. What are the names of your two podcasts, and where can people find it? Sure.
So my main podcast that I run is lead.exe. It's lead.exe, like an executable file. You can find that at leadexe.com, or you can get through it through my social. If you just go to roninjanitor.com, that has links to all my socials, my website, my podcast. That might be the easier way to find me. And then I'm Ronin Janitor pretty much on every social platform except for LinkedIn. But if you type in Ronin Janitor on LinkedIn, I'm pretty sure you will find me that way too.
Oh, you have one of the most unique names I've ever heard. Very memorable. Are you selling stickers right now, or is that just with friends?
I'm going to. So I did a test batch of those to see how they would come out. Gave them to some of my favorite people. You know, we can talk about this online. You shoot me an address. I got one coming your way. So
all right. I'm down for you. I know nothing about NFTs, but you can totally make an NFT out of that.
I probably could. We could save NFTs for another topic, right?
All right, Neil. Thank you for joining me. Cuss him. I'll put all of his stuff in the description below. This is a YouTube only podcast for now. So check that out for sure. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks for having me on.
Stay right there.